This story is about a girl who had dreamt about mermaids her whole life, and on her 11th birthday, her dream came true. However, her expectations and reality diverged significantly. I mean, every kid went through that phase, right? When you'd go to the pool, you'd dive in and imagine your legs fusing into one and growing scales of your favorite color. I wanted blue scales. More than once I'd surface hacking and coughing because I'd try to hold my breath for a second too long. Not pleasant. But by the time I was 10, I could do it for quite an impressive amount of time. My dad thought it was hilarious. Mom treated it as just one of those childish things I'd grow out of. But my Uncle Craig actually encouraged it. Uncle Craig was my mom's oldest brother, a big man with a thick stomach and a roaring laugh. Despite having 4 kids of his own, he loved coming to see me. He'd bring me seashells and tell me stories about his latest catch. And he always listened to me tell my mermaid stories. I was an imaginative little kid. I loved coming up stories about this mermaid named Elora, who was pretty and looked just like me. My parents never cared to listen. But Uncle Craig would eat up every one. Every time he came around, he'd ask me, "So, what has Princess Elora been up to lately?" And according to him, my face would light up like lighthouse through the fog. For my 11th birthday, he took me on a fishing trip. Mom tried to talk him out of it, saying I'd be bored the whole time, but Uncle Craig said that he'd show me a mermaid and that was it. Mom knew I'd never shut up about fishing with Uncle Craig if he was going to show me a mermaid. So when Friday finally came around, Uncle Craig picked me up and we drove to the ocean. Uncle Craig had his own boat, and it was actually pretty decently sized, big enough for us and 3 of his friends, Abe, Bobby, and Irvin. Irvin brought his twin daughters Ocean and River. They were quite a bit older than me, probably almost 18. His friends were quite nice, asking my name and complimenting my aerial backpack. Once we headed out on the water, Irvin turned and asked, "So Hazel, your uncle says you have stories about Princess Elora the mermaid. Care to share a few?" At first I was nervous, for adults and 2 older girls with all their attention on me, but once I got going about the time Princess Elora battled a hammerhead shark, I was chattering away with no fear at all. River would ask questions, like what was Elora's palace like and what she liked to eat for breakfast. Ocean didn't talk very much, but she braided my hair and made it super pretty. I think my mom expected I'd be bored to tears or that my uncle and his friends would get drunk and rowdy. On the contrary, there was a few beers tossed around at night, but the men stayed sober the whole time. Saturday I fished for the first time. That was kinda boring, but Ocean and River made it fun by singing. Both of them sounded just like the mermaids I dreamed about. Ocean would encourage me to join, and even though my singing talent would make a deaf man's ears bleed, the girls would grin and bear it. I caught a fish about mid-morning. I don't really remember what it was. All I remember is screaming that I was catching something, and my uncle was right behind me, encouraging me and telling me I had this. And I did. It was a tiny little thing, but the way everyone acted like I had just broken a world record. Lots of cheers and slaps on the back, picture opportunities abounded, and Uncle Craig lifted me above his head and tossed me into the water. Apparently, it was a tradition. My clothes were soaked, but I was grinning from ear to ear when he pulled me back out. This was the best birthday present I could have ever gotten. I'd almost completely forgotten about the mermaid thing. When I was shooed off to bed, Uncle Craig winked and said, "When we find a mermaid, don't worry, we'll wake you up." With a promise like that, it was almost impossible to go to sleep. I did end up drifting off sooner or later. I was awoken by my shoulder being gently shook in Abe's quiet voice. "We spotted one. Come on up, lassie." I stumbled to the deck, rubbing the sleep dust from my eyes and looking around eagerly for the mermaid. The mood had entirely changed from the day. Ocean and River were sitting at the front of the boat. My uncle was sitting on to my right while Irvin and Bobby were to the left. No one was talking, or singing, or even smiling. I frowned and opened my mouth when Abe pressed a finger to his lips. My mouth shut. Abe stood next to me, his eyes flicking around. The only sound was water lapping at the boat. Then Ocean gasped. "There she is!" I ran to the front of the boat with my uncle, my heart pounding. Was it her? Was it a real mermaid? I saw the brief tail flip before my uncle threw the nets over her. "Think we got it. Ocean, River, start singing." The sisters joined in unison, singing a song I didn't understand or know. The water turned to white foam as whatever was inside the net thrashed about. Beads of sweat dripped from my uncle's face and landed on the top of my head. He gritted his teeth and pulled harshly. "Irvin, grab hold. She's a fucking fighter," he barked. I got pushed out of the way as the other men grabbed the net and pulled. I heard the sound of something heavy coming out of the water. The girls silenced their singing as the catch was hauled up and then dropped on the deck. It was a real-life mermaid. The creature attempted to sit up as best as she could, trying to fold her tail beneath her as she looked around frantically. The lights on the boat flicked on brightly and she flinched, covering her face. I could scarcely breathe. I'd always hoped I'd see a mermaid someday. I would pray that they were real. And the real deal was just as beautiful as I hoped. Her kelp green hair clung to her skin, patches of cerulean scales growing across her breasts and arms. Her tail flopped about uselessly, the fins translucent and glittering in the light. Her royal blue tail, with gold flecks mixed in with the smooth scales. I barely realized I was reaching out to touch it. Uncle Craig seized my hand before it got too close. "Whoa, Hazel! Don't touch!" The mermaid lowered her hands as she bared her teeth ferociously, and it showed I would have made a horrible mistake. Her smile was more like a shark than a pretty mermaid princess. Bobby chuckled and lifted up his right hand, which was missing 3 fingers. "Rookie mistake. Been there, done that, kiddo," he said. I gulped and backed away. Uncle Craig pulled a knife from the sheath on his belt, and my attention hyper-focused on that. "What are you doing?" I asked. The mermaid's face had gone pale. She attempted to struggle away, but the twins grabbed the net and twisted it around her, making it impossible for her to crawl to the edge of the boat and jump off. My uncle paused for a moment before he turned to me. "Remember how we gutted that catch of yours this afternoon?" I nodded. "This is the same concept. You can go back to bed if you don't want to see." I swear time froze. I looked at the mermaid, who was starting to shake. Her eyes looked at me. She knew what that knife meant. I knew what that knife meant. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Mermaids bleed an almost greenish red. She wasn't alive for much of it. Uncle Craig didn't prolong her suffering. He slowly began to cut her down the middle before he froze. Holy, he made the final cut fast, and I saw dozens of reddish-black beads swirl about in her guts. The other men began to freak out, swearing and running their hands through their hair. Bobby's jaw dropped. That can't be," he stuttered. "Mermaid. Caviar." Uncle Craig lifted up a handful of it, running the small beads between his fingers. He looked at me before he grinned. "I've been fishing for maids since I was your size, Hazel. This is the first time I've personally harvested mermaid eggs. You're a good luck charm." I ran below deck to puke. I didn't make it to the toilet. I collapsed outside the bathroom and my dinner splattered across the floor. The stomach acid burned as I continued to dry heave, and it took all my strength not to pass out in my own vomit. I don't know when the girls came down, but they didn't get mad about the mess. They cleaned me up and put me to bed. I almost could have thought it was a dream, except in the morning when I walked up on deck to see the mermaid tails put on ice. They'd caught one more since I was in bed. This tail was ruby red and thicker than the other. I ran my hand over the scales, and they were as smooth as they looked. "We caught a merman after you went to bed." I turned around to see Uncle Craig, who looked nothing but proud at his catch. "You know how much last night's catch will pay out for me?" I didn't answer. He continued. "Enough to keep pay for your college. Already got my own kids covered. You want anything else for your birthday? New bike? Trip to Disneyland?" I looked back at the scaled tails. I couldn't speak. I couldn't say anything. I just remembered the look in the mermaid's eyes before the knife plunged in her chest, the spurt of blood covering my uncle's hands. "I can understand if you're upset." Uncle Craig sat a hand on my shoulder. "Your mom was the same when our dad took us the first time. Mermaid catching runs in the family. Has been since your great-great-granddad. And it isn't pretty. But it's what we do." He ran a hand through my hair and I flinched. "Let's go home, kid." Uncle Craig treated me to an enormous ice cream cone on the way home, my favorite flavor cake batter. I ate it while trying to forget about the tails without mermaids attached to them. I avoided my Uncle Craig a few months after that. I'd hide away in my room and pretend that I was busy. This didn't stop him from leaving me presents. I slowly grew to forgive him, and soon enough we were hanging out like old times. It's been 10 years. I'm already a published children's writer. I write books about Princess Allura the mermaid. Kids love how she has these crazy sharp teeth, although parents not so much. Writing about her makes me happy. Uncle Craig passed away 2 months ago from heart failure. He lived a good life. Long and full of happiness. One of the 2 things he's left me is his fishing boat. I got in my car and drove to the ocean as soon as I could. When I got there, I saw 2 grown women waiting for me. It took me a second to recognize them as Ocean and River. Ocean smiled and waved. "Hey, Hazel! You're not so much of a kid anymore, up for a fishing trip?" The other thing he left me was in my pocket. A list of coordinates. Places to fish. Can't wait. I'll drive the boat. This story is about a family who recently moved to a new home, causing their 5-year-old daughter, Lily, to create an imaginary friend named Casey. However, the situation took a strange turn when the family cat, Taters, mysteriously disappeared. My daughter, Lily, started talking about her new best friend, Casey, a few months back. She's been so lonely since we moved. When my husband Rahul and I realized that Casey was imaginary, we figured it was a coping mechanism. Lily is also 5, so we weren't too worried. In fact, before Casey showed up, Lily was convinced there was a monster under her bed. She never mentioned a monster at our old house, so we thought it may have been related to the move, resuming kindergarten in a new place, etc. No amount of us crawling under the bed and showing her that nothing was there, or night lights, helped. We'd just sit with her until she fell asleep. One day, she just started mentioning Casey out the blue, and that Casey kept the monster away, so she could go to bed all by herself now. Yes, I was grateful, but I was also proud that she imagined something/someone to protect her from her own fears. I asked her what Casey looked like over breakfast one morning, and she basically described a character from her favorite TV show. She then casually added, between bites of toast, "She has scary fingers and teeth, but she's really nice." She sounds nice. I'm glad you have her. Oh yes, me too. She looked at me conspiratorially. She ate the monster. It was gross. I didn't really think much about her comment at the time because kids can say some pretty weird things. Not long after she started talking about Casey, our cat, Taters went missing. He was healthy, happy, and had never been much of a roamer before, so Rahul and I had a bad feeling, but we kept searching for him. We weren't even sure how he got out of the house. Lily became quieter and more withdrawn after that. We figured she missed Taters on top of all the other changes in her life recently. I heard her yelling in her room once, but when I ran in to check on her, there was no one else there. She asked if she could eat in her room with Casey. She started wanting to eat most of her meals and snacks in her room by herself. I could hear her muffled talking, to Casey, I presumed. She later asked if I could add more meat to each meal. It was fine at first. I figured that may have been her way of dealing with the fact that our searches for taters were not going well coupled with a new home and school in a new state, but then it became every single meal. Every plate came back empty, but once school ended and she wasn't taking lunch and snacks to school anymore, Lily started looking noticeably thinner and more anxious. We started to seriously worry about our daughter's mental health and her eating habits. We wanted to watch her, make sure she was actually eating. I was also worried that if she was eating and still losing weight, she might be sick. I told her she needed to eat at the table with the family again, and to my surprise she looked scared, whispered, "Can I take a plate back for Casey, too?" I looked at my husband, shrugged, he shrugged back. "Sure, honey." The sheer relief on her face at that moment should have told me something. She slowly gained weight back, seemed happier even. The second plate she took to her room always came back clean. I was at first worried that she was now eating 2 plates of food at each meal, but she seemed healthy enough. My husband mentioned he noticed more raccoons around lately than when we had first moved in. We wondered if maybe Lily was sneaking the extra food outside by herself. We hoped not, since we lived in a wooded area, or was even dumping it out her bedroom window, which could explain the increasing number of raccoons. Not too long ago, Rahul and I decided that he'd visit his mom and brother for 2 weeks and bring Lily so she could visit family and friends, since he's a teacher and they are both off for the summer. I had some major work projects coming up, so I figured I'd stay and get some me time. I kissed my husband as I helped him load their bags into his car, pulled Lily into a hug and spun her around. She giggled. I told her to make sure Daddy doesn't drive too fast. Rahul stuck his tongue out at us at that. As we said our goodbyes, she looked more serious than I had ever seen her when she told me, "Wait, Mommy, make sure you feed Casey." "Do you promise?" "Of course, baby." "No, Mom, she gets very hungry." "I need you to promise. It's very important." I promised her I would. She smiled like a weight had lifted off her tiny shoulders as we buckled her into her seat in the back with her favorite stuffed animals. "I'll call if Taters comes home while you're gone." Lily stared at me. I corrected myself. When he comes home." Her only response was, "Mommy, don't forget." I didn't intentionally break my promise. I just got caught up in work, and without Rahul or Lily there, I forgot about lunch and dinner entirely the first day. I thought I had heard a low growl coming from her room around noonish, but I was so engrossed in the code I was finishing up for work. When I finally got everything running, error-free, I was in a great mood. My neck and shoulders were stiff for staring at the screen for hours on end without moving. I looked at the clock and it was 2 a.m. I grabbed a protein bar off my desk and felt a sense of tired excitement. I was snapped out of it when heard what sounded like another growl from Lily's bedroom, followed chewing, tearing at something, like a wild animal. I paused. "Hello?" The noise stopped. I heard what that sounded like scurrying across the carpet in her room. I cracked the door open. Her room was empty. Although I did notice a faint breeze, the window was open a bit, and the carpet below it was muddy. I tried to remember if I had left open. Had I missed the mud before? I honestly couldn't remember because of how tired I was at the time. I crossed the room and closed it. The next morning, I texted Rahul a picture of 2 small omelets I had made. I figured I'd eat Casey's for lunch.
"Ask Lily where I should put Casey's winky face."
He wrote back, "She says under the bed," with a shrug emoji. I thought that was weird, but I figured why not. I'd put the plate under there, snap a picture to send, and stick it in the fridge for later. I lifted the frilly bed skirt, placed the plate under, and took a picture. As I went to send it to my husband, I noticed the flash had picked up something white, just off screen. I looked under the bed. Feathers. I reached under the bed, leaning under further. One of her pillows was under the bed, torn to shreds. Once I had more of my body under the bed, I could see that near the pillow were old stains and one that was still drying. I was guessing from Lily sliding food under her bed and spilling it. I cropped the stain and pillow remnants out of picture and sent it. I added a note to my husband. Hey, do raccoons ever come indoors, like through an open window? While I was waiting for him to respond, I picked up the plate to stick it in the fridge. As I closed the door behind me, I swear I heard a hiss. The day was filled with meetings, so I just ate the second omelet while I worked. Rahul called me apologetically around 4. He sounded tired. Hey, sorry babe. I hate to bug you while you're working, but Lily will literally not stop asking me if you brought lunch to Casey yet since you didn't send a picture. I smiled to myself. I guess after the omelets, I've committed myself to making 2 plates and taking pictures of each meal until you get back. He laughed. Sorry, Beth. I talked to Lily, told her I missed her and loved her, and lied and said I was feeding Casey, since she seemed so worried. I said I just forgot to take pictures. Honey, can you put Daddy back on? He took the phone back from her. We talked about his family, the old neighborhood a bit, and then he asked, "Oh, what was up with your raccoon question from earlier? Did one get in?" I told him I wasn't sure and tried to explain over the sound of laughing and kids talking loudly on his end. He thought for a moment. Yeah, they can get in if any windows are open even a few inches, but if you see it, please don't approach it, call animal control. I felt an unexplainable wave of relief wash over me. Clearly it was the raccoons. That made sense, was logical. I liked when things make sense. Clearly Casey wasn't real because that was absurd. We said our goodbyes. I made dinner, a salad. I was taking advantage of being home alone and making whatever I wanted for dinner, so I was eating less carbs and meat than usual. Snapped a picture, but I definitely was not leaving a plate in her room all night if raccoons were already getting into the house. As soon as I took the picture, I took the second plate to the fridge again. I locked her bedroom window for good measure. I sat down to eat, had a fairly uneventful evening of TV and crocheting until I walked past Lily's room to head to bed. I heard the same noises as last time, but louder, more aggressive, and this time, something I can only describe as a slurping/crunching sound. I tried not to picture the wild animals likely thrashing around her room. I couldn't understand how they got in again. Maybe they never left the night before and I locked them inside by accident? I felt terrible but took Rahul's advice not to approach them and left the door closed. By morning it was quiet, so I cautiously opened the door, a bowl of oatmeal in my hand, prepared to complete the picture ritual. I gasped, her room was a mess. I'd expected some mess based on the sounds, but not to this extent. The window was still closed. Her stuffed animals were all over the floor, some were ripped, there were deep slash marks in portions of the carpet and bloody drag marks leading to under her bed, where spatters arched out from. Were there several of them? Had they been fighting under there? I took in a few deep breaths, cautiously lifted what was left of the bed skirts, and instantly wished I hadn't. Something was under there, torn apart, partially eaten. It was bigger than the raccoons I had seen. I tried to keep my own oatmeal down, dropped the second bowl, and ran. I called my husband from the kitchen, panicking. He said he would come home early, but I didn't want to alarm Lily or have either of them miss out on time with his family. He reluctantly agreed, and he asked one of our neighbors, Steve, who came by to help me an hour or so later. Jesus, Steve whispered, covering his own nose and mouth with the back of a gloved hand. He moved the empty bowl of oatmeal aside and told me I could leave if I wanted while he went under, pulled out whatever it was, that he'd help me clean up. I told him I'd stay and help, but I turned my back to him for a moment before we got started to compose myself. Something else caught my eye, bloody smears on the interior sides of the windowsill. As I walked closer to inspect, I saw child-sized bloody palm prints on the inside, bloody smudges on the locks. I excused myself and texted Rahul, trying to come across casual in tone despite my shaking hands. Can you ask Lily what happens if she doesn't feed Casey? After a long while, he wrote me back. She got really upset, so I'm not really sure. I let it go because I didn't want to upset her more. Steve and I finished up. Later, he and his wife came and helped me take the carpet out of Lily's bedroom. Luckily, there was hardwood underneath, though we couldn't get out the stains that had soaked through. I've been trying to replace her sheets and toys. In the meantime, I've been making sure I feed Casey, but I think something's changed since I forgot. Even though I've been bringing her 3 healthy meals a day for a week, and she's been eating them, I keep hearing sounds and sometimes finding more messes in Lily's room. The raccoons disappeared. I stopped seeing signs of them near the garbage, and the surrounding woods are silent. I've talked to Rahul, and even though we haven't said out loud to each other that whatever is under our daughter's bed is the cause, we know something is very wrong here. We've been browsing and sending each other links to homes for sale in the next town over. Steve had been helping me clean up, but I'm not sure he believed me when I tried explaining about Casey, and he probably thinks I'm crazy. He was going to come by yesterday, never did, and hasn't come since. I called his house, but his wife says she hasn't seen him since he headed this direction yesterday afternoon. I'm appreciative of all the help he gave me already and understand if he and his wife need a break from this. I just wish they'd tell me that instead of avoiding me. I need advice. What else can I do? I'm worried because Lily and Rahul come home in 2 days and things with Casey are not going well. I had started locking the door to our bedroom each night after we ripped out the carpet, and last night, I swear something tried opening it.